Yo, welcome everybody to a tips, tricks, and traps videos for your Foundations pre-release happening this weekend. If this video is your first interaction with this set with Foundations, kind of trying to see what's going on in this set, I have good news for you. Foundations is the most straightforward set we've had in a very long time. It is very much akin to a core set of days of yore. The mechanics are simpler. There are fewer words on the cards. I think a lot of the time, when you open your sealed pool, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what you should be building just looking at what your best cards are, what your deepest colors are. That said, still some good stuff to talk about. I want to go today through all of the archetypes, talking about which ones I think are some of the more supported ones, some of the ones that are a little bit less supported or weaker. I want to talk about some individual cards, some interesting combos that actually exist in this set, and also call out a trap or two. Call out some cards that might look pretty good, but I would advise against actually registering in your sealed deck. So let's start with the archetypes, just talking about the 10 two-color pairs, the signposts and commons. We're going to go through each of them one by one, and I'm just going to give you my thought on how good, how supported each of these decks are, and kind of what to look out for. So we're going to start with blue-white, Empyrean Eagle being the signpost and common for that deck. This is a really strong card. 3-mana, 2/3 flyer that pumps all of your other flyers. It's definitely a card that if I have a copy or two in my sealed pool, I'm going to look to see how many other flyers I have, see if I've got like a nice, blue-white tempo deck going on there. There isn't actually a ton of flying support in this set, as in there's not a ton of cards that care about flyers necessarily, but Empyrean Eagle is a very, very good payoff. So while I don't think most pools are going to push you towards like a blue-white flyer deck just based on the fact that there's not that many cards to support this deck, I do think having multiple copies of Imperial Eagle is a good reason to see if that deck exists in your pool. Next up, we've got blue-black, and I think you're going to want to think of blue-black just as a control deck, as a slower deck. It does have a theme of threshold, which is getting to 7 or more cards in your graveyard, but I don't think it's like a turbo threshold deck where you're like just like mill, now my cards are on. I think it's a little bit more, all right, just want to cast some removal spells, cast some card draw spells. Things are going to go to the graveyard. You're going to have some cards that surveil when they enter or mill 3 cards when they enter, but the core part of your deck is just going to be staying alive so you can kind of reap the benefits of your late game cards. The signpost in common here, Dreadwing Scavenger, is a pretty strong one. It's a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that when it attacks or enters, you draw a card, then discard a card, and if you've got Threshold, which is again 7 cards or more in your graveyard, it gets +1/+1 and it has Death Touch. So Dreadwing Scavenger here, while it's not like the linchpin of the deck like Empyrean Eagle might be for blue-white, it's still a very strong card. It's still a card that would pull me in to see if I have a blue-black deck, if I have enough card draw removal. So yeah, another deck that I think is pretty well supported. I like black, I like blue, I like these colors. I think that you can cobble together a pretty good slower control deck. And again, this signpost in common is another pretty strong one. Next up is red-black, which is a pretty standard aggressive deck. No surprises there. Usually red-black is fairly aggressive. It's got the raid mechanic, which says if you've attacked this turn, you get a little bonus on your creature when it enters or on your end step. But aside from that raid mechanic that just wants you to attack, it also has a bit more identity because there's a really good steal and sack deck in red-black. There is a good number of good sacrifice outlets in black, and red, first time in a while, gets a active treason effect, a steal your creature for the turn effect at common with involuntary employment, and it's a pretty solid one as well. So yeah, you can play red-black as just an aggressive deck, but I would definitely check your pool for how many sacrifice outlets you have, how many of those involuntary employments you have, because that's a real good synergistic thing if you can get that together. The signpost uncommon here, I think it's nothing special. Perforating Artist, 3-mana, 3/2 Death Touch. If you've attacked this turn on your opponent's end step, they either have to discard a card, sacrifice non-land permanent, or lose 3 life. I'm never going to cut this card from a red-black deck. It's fine, but not as exciting as some of the signposts and commons we're going to see, and not as exciting as the ones we've seen so far, to be honest. Our next deck here is red-green, and like it often has, it has the theme of caring about creatures power 4 or greater. The signpost here, it's a reprint, Ruby Daring Tracker, 2-mana for a 1/2 haste that taps to add red or green, and if you have a creature power 4 or greater, when she attacks, gets +2/+2. Not all that much to say about this deck, to be honest. It's very, very straightforward, very just classic big, dumb green or red things. Ruby's a strong card. Pretty simple, though. I think if your green cards are good and your red cards are good, that's how you're going to end up in red-green. No intricate synergies. Not that a lot of these decks have intricate synergies, but I think red-green even a little bit more than the other decks. Is a little bit what you see is what you get. Next up is green-white. And green-white cares about having +1/+1 counters on your creatures. The signpost uncommon here, Good Fortune Unicorn, is a 3-mana 2/2. It says whenever another creature you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. Green-white was the deck that me and my set review partner Mark were probably the lowest on. Mostly just because, one, this signpost uncommon is, I think, a little bit less good than some of the other ones. It's okay. It's a fine card. Probably about, a C-level card, but nothing exciting. And the payoffs for having creatures with +1/+1 counters are generally just not that strong. There really weren't many +1/+1 counter payoffs that excited us. So if you've got the pool for it, by all means, if you've got great white cards, great green cards, go for it. I wouldn't say don't play a white-green deck, but maybe the advice I would give you is don't let Good Fortune Unicorn specifically pull you in if you've got like 2 or 3 of them, because it's just not that strong of a card. Black-whites with Fiendish Panda. So Fiendish Panda is a cool card. This is a 4-mana 3/2. That says whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and then when this creature dies, you return another non-bear creature. This is a bear, for what it's worth, with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your graveyard to the battlefield. So black-white cares about life gain, as you might have inferred, but it also cares about sacrifice to some degree. Like I mentioned, black's got a pretty strong sacrifice package. Fiendish Panda as a standalone card is pretty good. I think even if you have no life gain in your deck, it's a pretty solid one, just a 3/2 that dies into another creature. I think black-white is one of the more supported decks, as in there's a lot of cards that gain life, have lifelink, care about when you gain life, do a thing. And given that it's a pretty supported archetype and black and white both have pretty good removal, I would expect this to be one of the more common decks you see in your sealed pool and even decks that you face, honestly. Next up, we've got blue-red spells, and Balmor, Battlemage Captain, is back. 2-mana 1/3 flyer that when you cast a instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1 and gain trample until the turn. This card is great, and I think this blue-red spells deck is one of the most supported decks in the whole format. So many good spells, a lot of good payoffs for casting spells. Balmor, originally printed in Dominaria United. We've got its friend, Tolarian Terror, back again, which is another awesome spells payoff. So yeah, really be on the lookout for this one. I do have high hopes for blue-red in this format. Black-green is doing elves, and we've got Warden of the Cycle as a signpost here. So this is a 4-mana 3/4. A little bit hard to cast, by the way. 1 black, green, green. But a 4-mana 3/4, that's an elf. And it has the Morbid ability, which means if a creature died, you get to do this thing. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, choose one. Either gain 2 life or draw a card, you lose a life. Elves is another archetype that is fairly well supported. We do have actual factual Llanowar elf in this set, so that goes a long way in propping up this deck's power. But I do think that there's a good amount of support here, a good amount of things that care about elves, a good healthy handful of elves at both common and uncommon. One note about elves and the morbid mechanic, which, black-green kind of is doing both morbid and elves. Morbid tends to trigger a little bit less than you might imagine. If you haven't played a set with morbid before, you kind of read the card and expect, oh, I'm going to get this pretty often. It surprisingly doesn't play out that way as often as you might think in practice. So when you're reading and evaluating your morbid cards, don't expect that thing to happen every single turn. Like Wardens of the Cycle here, if you could just draw a card and lose a life every single turn, this card would be phenomenal. It's not going to exactly play out that way. Then we've got red-white. And red-white, I think, gets the best signpost uncommon here in Heroic Reinforcements. This is a 4-mana sorcery that makes 2 1/1 soldier tokens, and your creatures get +1/+1 and gain haste until end of turn. Just responsible for so much damage. Army in a can. Just by itself, it's 4/4 haste worth of stats. But of course, you're going to have other creatures. There's a lot of token makers in this set. So like a red-white go-wide deck, which is what this is supporting, is very, very supported. I'm not sure if this is going to be the actual best deck in the format, but I would not be surprised if that was the case, especially because Heroic Reinforcements is such a strong card. And then lastly, we have blue-green, and blue-green doesn't have too much of an identity. It's sort of got like a landfall theme. There's a lot of landfall cards in the set, but I don't think you're necessarily going to like be building a deck around landfall with, 20 lands or anything like that. The signpost here, Tatiova Benthic Druid, fan favorite, 5-mana 3/3. That when you have a land enter, you gain a life, draw a card. A pretty good card. I think if you played original Dominaria and remember how good this card was there, it's not going to be quite as good. The cards in that set were a lot lower power level. So Tatiova, when compared to those, looks really, really good. And it's still going to be a solid one, but not just like a busted mythic uncommon like it was there. So blue-green, you're probably not going to be in it for the commons, for the uncommons all that often. But as we will see when we get to the rares, there's 2 really excellent blue-green rares that, yeah, I would be very tempted to be playing blue-green if you had those. All right, moving on now, I'm going to talk about the land fixing that is available in this format. So we've got the cycle of tap lands that come in and gain you a life. Bloodfell Caves, as an example for the black-red one here. You're going to see these in 50% of your packs. In 50% of your packs, these are going to replace a basic land. You're also going to see Evolving Wilds in the actual common slot. This is not in the land slot. So there's fixing here and there, not infinite fixing. I think splashes are doable, but more of a, 1 to 2 cards per deck kind of thing. I would definitely not recommend like a straight 3-color deck in this format. I don't think the fixing is quite there. 2 really important commons that I want to call out that are kind of similar are Burst Lightning and the card Stab. Burst Lightning is one of the best shocks they've ever printed. This is a 2-mana instant that deals 2 damage to any target, but you can also kick it for 4 mana, so 5 mana in total, to deal 4 damage to any target. Not only is this a shock that scales with the game, but it also is just 4 damage to the face in the late game. This card is really, really strong. I would not be surprised if it ends up being the top common. Stab, similarly strong. Not quite as good as Burst Lightning, but the reason I bring these 2 up is I think they're really going to shape a lot of the format. And I think they're really going to shape specifically what creatures you feel comfortable playing, because there are actually quite a few 4-mana creatures in the set that have 2 toughness. And when your 4-mana creature gets hit by a Burst Lightning or by a Stab, you're going to feel pretty bad about it. So I'm not saying never play a 4-mana creature with 2 toughness. I'm just saying if you're building your deck and you're like, well, should I play this 4-mana 4/2 with a pretty solid ability, or should I just play this 3-mana card with 3 toughness? I would maybe lean towards the 3 toughness card. There is a infinite combo in this set. It involves a mythic and a common. So Bloodthirsty Conqueror is a 5-mana 5/5 flying death touch mythic that says whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. And Marauding Blight Priest here is a card that says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So you get one of those going and they just keep triggering off each other and your opponent dies. So do be on the lookout for that. I don't think Marauding Blight Priest is an awesome card or anything, but I would definitely play it if I had a copy of Bloodthirsty Conqueror in my pile. 2 trap cards that I want to call out. Cards that might seem kind of enticing, but I don't think are very good. Painful Quandary. This one, no matter how many times it gets printed, I feel like it always tricks people. This effect is not a good limited effect. It's a 5-mana card that doesn't do anything when it comes in, and you can really imagine your opponent being put in a tough position where it's like, do they lose 5 life? Do they discard a card? The issue with this card is that no matter which one they do, it's always going to be the one that you care about the least, right? So if you're facing an aggressive opponent, they go, all right, I take 5 damage. What do I care? I'm going to kill you. If you face a slower opponent whose life total might be under a little bit of pressure, that slower opponent's probably drawn a bunch of cards and they don't mind discarding additional land here or there. So not really worth your 5 mana. Another trap to call out here is Swiftfoot Boots. So this is a 2-mana equipment with equip 1. The equipped creature gets hexproof and haste. This is a card that, if you're a commander player, you might be pretty familiar with. Not quite worth the card in limited most times. Giving hexproof to your creatures sounds nice, but again, just like not really worth an entire card. The haste ability, also pretty minor, not something that I'm too interested in. So yeah, I would definitely shy away from this card. It looks like a card that you might want to play. I don't really think so. And then just for a little bit of fun here, I want to call out the top 5 rares that I would hope to open in my Foundations pre-release. So not in any particular order. These are all excellent A+ level cards. And the first one I want to call out here is Coma World Eater. When I first saw this card, I read it as, what is the title? Coma. Uh-oh. What's the rarity symbol? Rare. I thought they downshifted OG Coma to rare. They didn't do that, but this Coma is almost as good as the OG Coma. So it's a 7-mana 8/12. They can't be countered, has trample and ward 4, which is pretty close to hexproof. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you make 4 3/3 tokens. Card's just absurd. Card is excellent. This is one of the rares that I mentioned where it's like, yeah, not a lot that pulls you into blue-green generally, but Coma is definitely a card that would. Then we've got another busted blue-green card, Zamone, which is a 4-mana 1/4 that at the beginning of combat and your turn, you can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And also has the ability to double counters on your creatures. Card's just great. It's going to take over the game very, very quickly. And unlike Coma, this one's splashable too. Liliana Dreadhorde General. One of the better limited planeswalkers of all time. 6 mana, 6 loyalty planeswalker. So a lot of loyalty. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. Her +1 spits out 2/2 zombies. Her -4 makes people sacrifice things. And her -9, well, if you get there, you're going to win the game. Makes your opponent sacrifice all but one creature in one land, essentially. A blue rare here, Curator of Destinies. This is a 6-mana 5/5 that can't be countered, has flying, and when it enters, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, you separate them into a face down and a face up pile, and an opponent chooses one, you put one in your hand, one in your graveyard. Giant flyer, draws you a bunch of cards, just gonna be very good. And my last card in this list, a little bit cheaty, because it's a secret guest, so it's not gonna come up too often, but Embercleave. Embercleave's in this set, so if you open Embercleave, congratulations, pat yourself on the back, show it to everybody around you, or maybe wait until your pre-release is actually over, because you don't want people sniffing out that Embercleave, because the surprise of Embercleave is half the power of the card. Anyways, I hope this was a informative, interesting, educational little video to get you prepared for pre-release. I think that this is going to be a really good back to basics limited Magic experience. If you like this, haven't subbed to the channel already, do consider doing so. Thanks for watching, good luck at your pre-release, and may you all open Lilianas and Embercleaves.